Yooka-Laylee as a concept is almost mythical. This sequel to Banjo-Tooie everyone thought would never come to be suddenly on Kickstarter in May of 2015. Former Rare staff at the helm, Grant Kirkhope and David Wise composing, it was a dream come true for thousands of people. So much so that the project easily met its funding goal. Playtonic hit it out of the park, and they managed to keep up the momentum even in spite of a failed Wii U port and the removal of JonTron. I would have never expected the mixed to negative reception it would receive, and reading the reviews has left me in a state of utter confusion. This wasn't a Mighty No. 9 situation. Yooka-Laylee had almost nothing to indicate it would be a stinker leading up to its release, yet here we are. Amidst the chaos, I've been left with a burning question. What did Yooka-Laylee get so wrong? And the only answer I can come up with is that it's gravely misunderstood. I won't declare Yooka-Laylee a perfect game. I hate Kartos, some of Rextro's minigames are repetitive, and the camera isn't ideal. But there's so much to love about Yooka-Laylee that's been completely overlooked for what I see as minor issues. Now, I'd like to identify the criticisms I take issue with to avoid creating a straw man. I recognize that not all discussion on the game has been negative, and I don't want to come across as some white knight. I'd also like to note that I have never played Banjo-Kazooie, but I did grow up with the 3D Mario games and other 3D platformers. I believe Yooka-Laylee to be different enough that I don't think I'm blinded by nostalgia. In fact, I don't feel any nostalgia while playing. I do want to acknowledge it though, because there is certainly a potential for bias. Alright, let's H-Bomber Guy this joint and defend Yooka-Laylee.
Camera aside, one of my main gripes with Yooka is that there are only 5 worlds to explore outside of the hub. That's definitely a disappointment, especially when you factor in that one of the 5 is flat out not good. The 4th, a sprawling casino, is disappointingly lifeless considering the gaudy source material. This place is flat, dull, and filled with banal, chance-based tasks like slot machines that grind the pace of the adventure to a halt if you don't have awesome luck. Given that the world is 20% of the total game, it's absolutely a letdown.
What exactly does it mean for a space in a video game to feel empty? One would assume large sections of space with nothing to do but walk, though it could also mean a world so big that it has to stuff as much content as humanly possible, to the point where it feels empty because of how insignificant the quantity of that content is. I would assume the former is true in this case, and it's what I consider to be empty. Let's look at the biggest target for this argument, the 4th world, Capital Casino. Is it empty? First, we need to figure out how the world works. To get the Pages, you have to collect tokens around the casino. You can cash in 10 tokens for 1 Pagey. So what can you do to get tokens? It isn't actually much different from the other worlds. You explore the world to complete various activities. There are slot machines, puzzles, a golfing minigame, a helicopter transformation, Rextro, the Knights of Hamelot, Kartos, Inept, etc. Considering the Pagey count is exactly the same as other worlds, and that Capital Casino is actually smaller in size than most of the other worlds, I don't understand where the notion of emptiness comes from. I have a feeling the complaints come from the slot and pachinko machines scattered around the level. They're simple challenges for sure. The slot machines require you to line up your face, and the pachinko machines require you to get 4 balls into the hole at the bottom. Here's the thing though, almost every one of the machines are different. There's a slot machine where the button on the left stops the slot on the right, and so you have to figure out what each button does since they don't align. Or a slot machine where every time you press a button, the next slot changes direction. Or a pachinko machine where you can stop specific barriers that move from side to side. There are only a couple slot machines that are exactly the same, and I'm sure in that specific instance, you would have an argument. However, I don't think there's a single empty world. Tribal Stack Tropics has a few races with the Cloud, Rampo, Kartos, Rextro, and a bunch of hidden Pages scattered throughout the huge tower and mainland. Glitter Glaze Glacier has a snowplow transformation, 5 hats to collect and give back to snowmen, Kartos and Rextro again of course, a whole new isometric area with a boss hidden deep within, and like Tribal Stack Tropics, there are a bunch of hidden Pages. This is true for every single world. Even Capital Casino has the same setup with hidden rooms holding tokens. The only difference is that you cash your tokens instead of immediately getting Pages. If the worlds aren't empty, I suppose we move to the question, do the abundance of activities hold up individually? Rather, is what you do in Yooka-Laylee worthwhile?
The other update to the Banjo formula, being able to expand worlds, is less successful. Each of the base worlds is clearly incomplete, but expanding them doesn't necessarily improve them. Because most of them have additions in multiple areas and directions, their layouts are hard to follow, and it can be tedious just to figure out where you haven't been yet. The snow level in particular is broken up into a bunch of areas that connect in bizarre ways, and even after several hours exploring it, I'm not entirely sure which caves connect to which parts.
Right. There are two mechanics that work well off of each other in this game: the moves you collect from Trowser and the world expansions. When you first visit a world, it's only part of that world. Sometimes this means only half of the world is missing, or sometimes that means almost all of the world is missing, in the case of Galleon Galaxy. I posit this is to give more of an incentive to backtrack when you get a new move. Not only do you travel back to a world to complete various objectives with your widened moveset, but when you come back, the world will have expanded. Maybe not the first world, it's quite easy to expand that one on your first run-through. But I didn't expand any of the other worlds because I wanted to explore the later levels. I went all the way up to Galleon Galaxy and bought the last move. Then I went back and started fully exploring the worlds. I already knew the layout of each world, so it was just about finding an objective I couldn't complete before, or exploring a newly opened area. 3D platformers, much more so than 2D platformers, have always been about situational awareness. Super Mario 64 was as much about learning the layout of the castle and each world as it was about collecting stars. It's through learning the layout of each world that collecting each star is feasible. In order to get the 100 coin star, you have to know where most of the coins are, hence why it's one of the last challenges new players will complete. I'd argue figuring out what you're supposed to do in a collectathon is just as, if not more important than what you actually do. It makes sense to me that backtracking would be very simple as long as you're paying attention to the layout of Ivory Towers. I mean, are we going to pretend that each objective isn't clearly spelled out? In Glitter Glaze Glacier, there's a hot tub who wants bubbles. This might not make any sense on a first run-through, and luckily you can leave a world at any time if you're stuck somewhere. Since this is the second world, you'll probably pick up a helpful new power-up to get you that pagey. Sure enough, the next world nets you the power to create a bubble and walk underwater. Now you can travel back to the hot tub whenever you want, create a few bubbles, and bam, new pagey. A platforming challenge in Tribal Stack Tropics, but I can't jump far enough to make it through the challenge. I guess I need some kind of ability. Yet again, in Glitter Glaze Glacier, you get the ability to glide, which means you can return to Tribal Stack Tropics at any time to get another pagey. You want to know the best part? Nothing is forcing you to go back right away, so you can keep that thought in the back of your mind as you rack up different moves and eventually come back for revenge. It's that same sense of satisfaction you'd get from a Metroidvania, and it's not as if Ivory Towers is cumbersome to travel through. I concede the quiz shows aren't too fun when you're first traveling from area to area, but once you've done the quiz, you'll never have to do it again. This means a simple walk from one area to another. There are also a bunch of shortcuts to connect the later worlds to the first world. There's even a bit of Metroidvania-style progression in Ivory Towers, where they hide pages and quills behind specific moves. The moves and world expansions work in tandem to create a satisfying system of progression through backtracking.
Yooka-Laylee doesn't really put the sandbox environments to good use most of the time. The better worlds work not because you're having to crisscross a giant environment to solve puzzles or engage in connected activities, but rather because they keep each objective isolated and in its own space. The few worlds that try to achieve a greater level of depth mostly fail to get it right. Too often you're left wandering around aimlessly or excessively backtracking, taking the joy out of exploration.
Now for the burning question. What is ultimately the point of a 3D collectathon? Why are they compelling? I want to touch once again on this idea of situational awareness. Huge, sprawling levels with multiple objectives. The goal is to find each objective more than it is to complete it, and I do think the act of finding a task to complete is inherently satisfying. You don't have a minimap, or a map of any kind. You have a stat screen totaling how many pages, quills, ghostwriters, etc. you have left to collect. The missing link is where you find each pagey or quill, and that's definitely deliberate. You're supposed to get lost in a game like this, which is why the criticisms about being lost and wishing for a minimap bug me. Because when you add a minimap and strip away the exploration and memorization, what you're left with are a bunch of random activities on a checklist. At that point, it's no different than the millions of tasks in Assassin's Creed, and you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who thinks Assassin's Creed has a worthwhile incentive to fully complete it. Then there's the notion that not all of the objectives are fun to complete, and I actually agree to an extent. I've mentioned before that I absolutely hate Kartos because the camera whips around all over the place during sharp turns, and the cooldowns for the boost, slowdown, and cannon shot are not made especially obvious. But this is also one pagey in each world. I guess 2 if you count the boss of Capital Casino. If you wanted, you could easily ignore Kartos and still complete the game. You only need 100 pages to fight Capital B. There are 20 pages in Ivory Towers and 25 pages in each of the 5 worlds, which all add up to 145 pages. You can miss 45 pages, which means you can distribute your time a variety of different ways. You can completely ignore Ivory Towers and only collect 20 pages in each world and still have enough to fight Capital B. Or you can get 10 pages in Ivory Towers and you'll have 10 pages to ignore stretched out across the 5 worlds. What I'm getting at here is that most of the annoying objectives, or the difficult to find objectives, can be skipped over completely. In a world like Tribal Stack Tropics, there are only a few pages I don't like. The 2 from Rextro, Kartos, the Max Quill pagey, and Rampo. Bam. 5 pages I don't particularly like getting, and even then, this version of Kartos is so easy that I don't mind playing it. Also, playing the Rextro minigame once isn't too bad, I just don't like playing it twice. That applies to pretty much every Rextro appearance. I can confidently approach every world like this knowing I can finish the game whenever I want, having ignored a challenge I didn't like. I'll still be satisfied because I explored a world and found a sufficient amount of pages or quills. Personally, I have a completionist mindset, so it's hard to stop myself from collecting everything in a game, so I usually do not skip over objectives. You could argue that the point of a collectathon is to make 100% completion as fun as possible, and I would definitely agree with that. This is why Yooka-Laylee is far from my favorite 3D platformer. But that completionist mindset is something specific to me, and it's never forced on anyone. There's enough leeway here to skip objectives that people don't like, and it's more possible than many reviews would have you believe. Then, of course, we come to the objectives themselves. I would argue that most of them are fun. As I said, I like the Rextro minigames. I like searching for quills and Ghost Riders because they're hidden pretty well. Trying to figure out what I need to do to collect a Ghost Rider while not groundbreaking is thought-provoking. I don't think every boss is great, but they're all competent. The standout for me being the boss of Moody Maze Marsh. This boss in particular is fairly challenging. He starts out easy, you just jump over his tentacles, but then he floods the room and you have to avoid his tentacles while dealing with the swimming controls. They won't win any awards, but they're far from frustrating, and it helps that David Wise composes for them. The DN Ray transformations aren't widely applicable, but I don't think they were ever meant to be. Transforming into a flower to complete one objective seems shallow, but it was really finding the molecule that was the challenging part. While I do enjoy transformations like the helicopter, which allows for free-form vertical exploration of Capital Casino and lets you complete a ton of the objectives, I still enjoy transforming into a school of fish because, once again, finding the molecule was the tough part. The transformation into a fish is just a cool twist on what would normally be an underwater objective. There's this sense of variety in Yooka-Laylee, partnered with a generous amount of choice that adds up to a satisfying collectathon where you can ignore some of the objectives that don't work while still exploring for the ones that are fun. And since everyone is going to prefer some objectives over others, everyone wins. So if we have full worlds, if the backtracking and world expansions are neat additions that feed into each other, if the objectives are mostly fun and the worst objectives can be skipped over without any issue, what is really the core problem with Yooka-Laylee? Why do critics seem to be mixed on it?
Now, unfortunately, this game is equal parts nostalgia trip and equal parts nostalgia reminder, one time making you feel like you did when you were a kid strapping into that freakish N64's controller designed by aliens, or being shown forcibly that platforming back then wasn't the magical nirvana we all like to pretend it was.
Ultimately, Yooka-Laylee's best and worst aspects come directly from its predecessor. If you're looking for a faithful return to the Banjo-Kazooie formula, Yooka-Laylee certainly delivers. From the font to the menus to the music, it's worthy of the title of spiritual successor. But despite attempts at modernizing the formula, its style of gameplay is still outdated, and it doesn't stay challenging or interesting for long because of it.
The fact that Yooka-Laylee relies so heavily on its predecessors ends up being one of the biggest problems. Everything here feels like it's not only been done before, but it's been executed much better too.
Most of the valid criticisms of Yooka-Laylee I've seen are of its camera and some annoying objectives, and I do not wish to discount these criticisms because they're fair and necessary if we want this genre to grow. But a fair amount of criticism blasted at Yooka-Laylee showcases a misunderstanding of the genre. What is a collectathon with a minimap? What is a collectathon without elements of Metroidvania? What is a collectathon without variety? What is a collectathon without a sense of space? What is a collectathon with a focus on combat? Well, that's just not a collectathon. As such, so many reviews decry it as a relic of the past or nostalgia bait, that this genre just does not work for one reason or another, that Banjo-Kazooie is a game from the last century and we should treat it as such. This is a surprisingly regressive way of thinking. See, I don't get caught up in number scores or whatever. I know people got really hot and bothered because Jim Sterling gave Yooka-Laylee a 2 out of 10. I couldn't care less about an arbitrary, meaningless number. What I don't like about Jim Sterling's review is his idea that Yooka-Laylee is predicated on a foundation that never worked, or only worked in the context of when Banjo-Kazooie was released. I think because we haven't seen a collectathon in ages that people have forgotten what makes a collectathon. A focus on big worlds with tons to do and see, to incentivize you to memorize the layouts of the stages and hub worlds so you can get around easier and figure out where the game is hidden what. That's a collectathon. A colorful, adventurous treasure hunt. This video, though its title may have led you to believe so, isn't a defense of Yooka-Laylee in the strictest of terms. Yooka-Laylee probably won't be my game of the year, and I'm not sure yet whether it will even make it on a list of mine. It has problems we should certainly be quick to point out for the growth of the genre. This video is a defense of collectathons, because it seems too many reviewers are out of touch with what the genre is all about. I think that it's very possible 3D platformers could make a return. We're already seeing stuff like the Crash remakes and A Hat in Time. Mario Odyssey even is shirking away from its linear 3D land and galaxy roots and going more akin to Super Mario Sunshine and Super Mario 64. Things are changing, and whether or not we want to admit it, the critical perspective influences this change. It can lead to people avoiding a purchase, which can lead to trouble for Playtonic, which could lead to a public misunderstanding of this particular genre, which could lead to a shortage of games in this genre. I get that's a slippery slope argument, but it's worth considering at the very least. It's fine if people don't like something, but it feels like this critical declaration that collectathons do not work is incredibly short-sighted, and it can only mean yet another unique gaming experience is forgotten. Though, I have a feeling that people will probably disagree with me. I mean, feel free to do so in the comments. I welcome feedback of all types, even if that feedback comes with a dislike attached. I don't really care as long as you explain that dislike thoroughly. Alternatively, if you happen to like what I said here, give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you'd like to hear more of my rantings. I promise you it's worth your time. My name has been KingK, and I certainly hope you have some well-deserved fun today.